Support for this episode comes from the University of San Francisco's SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, better known as JSSJ. The JSSJ graduate level certificate program in JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, is more than an educational program. It's a call to action to improve the future of every Jewish institution. Our classes meet the moment with supportive learning that helps navigate an evolving and challenging Jewish community landscape. Bring these invaluable skills, tools, and resources to your organization. Applications are accepted on a rolling basis. Apply by January 12th to get in on spring classes before they begin. Just head to usfca.edu/JEDI. A brief note before this episode begins. We, and I'm sure all of you listening, are holding feelings of anger and frustration and sadness as we pray for peace in Israel and Gaza and for the healing of our world. We release this episode while holding pain in our hearts, and if now is not the time to listen to something that will feel separated from the tragedy of our moment right now, just save this episode for a later date. You can come back to it. If now would be precisely the moment to take a second and consider the future of our Jewish community, in a conversation that does not tie directly to Israel-Palestine, we invite you to listen in.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 405, Jewish Demons. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we continue our series of episodes exploring digital Judaism with Olivia Devorah Tucker, who has experience teaching in multiple digital spaces of Jewish learning and will soon be adding the Unyeshiva to their Rolodex of teaching experiences. Olivia Devorah Tucker will be teaching a class called Developing a Demon, Ashmedai Through the Ages. You can see a full description of this class, which starts just after Thanksgiving, along with a number of other shorter 3-session Unyeshiva classes, by heading over to judaismunbound.com/classes. There are a lot of amazing offerings that we hope you'll check out. So now a little bit more introduction of our guest today. Olivia Devorah Tucker is a Jewish demonologist, Talmud enthusiast, theater collaborator, and challah sculptor. Their class at the Unyeshiva will explore and interpret the lore of Ashmedai, also known as Asmodeus, the Demon King, from his earliest mentions in the apocryphal book of Tobit to his epic confrontation with his fellow monarch, King Solomon, followed by a timely appearance in the 1989 picture book, Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins. The class will look at how stories and storytellers have changed the nature of Ashmedai and also examine what role he might play in today's world should he choose to return from exile, or perhaps he already has. Olivia Devorah Tucker has been published in Kendon Alfon's Feeding Women of the Talmud, Feeding Ourselves, and also performed as a dramaturg Miturgaman for Ella Gabriel Mason's Queer Jewish, Dancing in the Diaspora. Olivia Devorah Tucker serves as a program coordinator at one of our favorite organizations, Svara, a traditionally radical yeshiva, and also is a co-op member of the Glitterbox Theater in their home of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Olivia Devorah Tucker has taught with our friends at Svara and at Shelmala, and we couldn't be more honored and excited to have them add their magic to the Unyeshiva. And yeah, I said magic on purpose because you can learn more about Olivia Devorah Tucker by heading to www.talmudmagic.com. So, Olivia Devorah Tucker, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much.
It's been a long time. I remember meeting you initially in Pittsburgh as a listener to Judaism Unbound, and I don't know how many years that was.
I think that was the Weeks of Jewish Flourishing. I wrote F. Shalom in Pittsburgh.
That Pittsburgh trip of yours, Dan, is definitely like a spot on our timeline. We have a lot of people that we connected to there. So shouts to Pittsburgh. We love y'all.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so Olivia, we really want to hear from you, and I'm not asking you to channel or ventriloquize, as Lex was just discussing before we came on the air, but as I was reflecting on this question of demons, I was wondering, it's not something that we've talked about very much on this show, and I'm sort of wondering if we were to be talking to a Jewish demon, what might we be talking about?
You might be talking about many of the things that you talk to any Jew about, where they come from, what they think about the Jewish world, where they're going, what their place is, how they've been marginalized, what they've done to build community, what texts they like to learn, what their music is. All of these things I've found in demon study. Demons are what got me into Talmud in the first place when I was preparing for a birthday Shabbat dinner at our local Moishe house. And they joked that I should do it about Jewish unicorns. I said, "Do we have unicorns?" And found Sacred Monsters by zoologist Rabbi Natan Slifkin, which led me beyond unicorns, which we have at least 3 of, into wonderful things.
Is 3 unicorns a triceratops?
Yeah, if they all hang out together. This brought me to the story of the Shamir. And the story of the Shamir, which I'll talk about later, is involving demons. And I said, demons? What is this? And that's what got me into Talmud, in searching and tracking down the sources that the rabbi was discussing in his book. And once I found demons, demons are from page 3 of the Talmud throughout many, many Masechto, many volumes of Talmud, in discussions of law, of halakha, and discussions of storytelling, Agadah. They talk to the sages, they torment them, they sometimes seem far more moral. They're very curious subjects.
As I've mentioned a few times, my wife and I have been doing Daf Yomi together for the last 3.5 years, this daily page of Talmud study. And in the first volume, Brachot, there's a lot of demons involved. There's a lot of demons, like they're waiting for you in the bathroom. There's all kinds of things that you have to do to make sure that the demons don't get you. And then I've been kind of disappointed because for the last 3 years, there's only been a minimal number of demons, including, I believe, the Shamir, who comes in a later volume. But I'm hoping that their demons are going to come back in the second half of the Talmud cycle, over the next 3.5 years. But can you tell us a little bit about some demons? I mean, I think that when we hear the word demon, a lot of people are like, it's not worthy of respect. And I appreciate that you told us that the demons have these feelings of being marginalized, because I think that way that we think of demons may be indicative of a larger dismissiveness that we have in the sort of mainstream Jewish community of a variety of characters that are either living in our time in actual physical flesh or that are otherwise present. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of share with us a little bit about what we should know about demons in general, but also particular demons.
Sure, I'll tell you my favorite demon story, which is far after Talmud. This is something that's attributed to the Kotzker Rebbe, who was a Polish rabbi around 1800. Who was once asked, Rambam, Maimonides, a great sage, was quite a rationalist in his teaching. He was a physician and said that anybody who believed in magic had been led astray by Greek philosophy, and demons weren't real and angels were all dreams, even when they were talked about in the Bible. And yet, great teachers like the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon said demons were real and had many encounters with them. And so this person asked the Kotzker Rebbe, what's going on here? And the Kotzker Rebbe said that the Torah of Maimonides was so powerful that when he decreed that demons didn't exist, they all had to pack up and leave. But that later, the incredible Torah of the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov, when they said that demons were real and the magic
Which, just
did
to give
exist.
some context, the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov are kind of two opposite schools, the Hasidim and the Misnah, that are seen as like very much conflicting with each other, but the heads of both of them like demons. So this is like a big deal that both of them are into demons.
I don't know if they like demons, but
that both of them are into mobilizing demon teachings.
At very least, they did not deny that demons existed in the Talmud and existed for them, and are about 600 years after Maimonides. And their power, the power of their Torah, said the Kotzker Rebbe, meant that demons were allowed back into the world. I compare this to Cyrus the Great of Persia inviting Jews back from exile in Babylon after the Persians conquered the Babylonians, where many Jews, like in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, said, okay, we'll come back, we'll build the second temple. And many Jews said, actually, we like it over here. This is diaspora. Diaspora is good. Diaspora keeps us in many different places and makes sure that we are in all of the world. and allows us to be in many communities and cultures. And what reason should we go back? What safety and assurity does a demon have that we are not going to once again decide that they don't exist? Which is very much what happened, I see, in the Haskalah era, the era of Jewish enlightenment in the next couple hundred years, leading to the creation of the Reform movement, this period of turning towards science and away from superstition, where I think we threw out the demons with the bathwater.
They are in the bathroom, as Dan mentioned before, so throwing them out with the bathwater, unfortunately, is something you can accidentally do or purposely do.
Precisely.
This is great. So I had a similar moment of like, oh, wait, there's demons here. And I think I use it as a shortcut sometimes when I'm talking about what the Talmud even is to people, generally. So there's a lot of folks out there who have heard the word Talmud, Jews, people who aren't Jewish, etc. And it's like, well, like, what is it? I hear it's this really long book. And, there's different ways to distill it, but I tend to go like, well, it has a lot of debates between rabbis about different rules, and then it goes on tangents, and like, for example, they'll like talk about demons for a while, and then they'll come back to another rule. Like, I think that in brachot, like you mentioned, right towards the beginning of the Talmud, that is a common strategy. But the reason I think it's important is because telling people there's a random tangent about demons, that's about the maximum amount of not what I thought the Talmud was that you can bring in. And so once you've taught people, oh, there's like demon narratives in there, and like talking to them, and rabbis seem to not only think they exist, but have all sorts of analysis about exactly how they exist, something cracks open in people. When I think about your class, it's not only like, oh, cool, like we're talking about demons. It's a way to recognize that our tradition is much bigger than we thought, and is not just this series of like, oh, cool, interesting intellectual debates, but includes stuff like demons that we may have thought, A, were not core to our tradition, and B, sometimes I think when a lot of us hear like demons or angels and demons, we flash subconsciously or consciously to Christianity. Secularly, when there are stories of demons or whatever, it's often part of a Christian context and tied to things like the devil. So it's like really wild to see that's right there in Jewish tradition. And even that one of the sections of Talmud, I like to remind people this, that even folks into demons don't always notice. There are 6 sections of the Talmud. One of them is called Nezikin, which is translated damages. And it's all about like people breaking each other's stuff and who's responsible for it. That is tied very directly to the word mazikin, which is an umbrella term for demons. And it's even, if anybody's a fan of the show Lucifer, the name of the main demon that my wife was for Halloween a couple years ago, I was Lucifer, is mazikin, which is a Hebrew word meaning demon, or Aramaic word, I guess, meaning demon. Can you talk to us why it's fun to talk about demons? Sure, but it's actually like more important than just being fun. It points to an expanding of what we think Judaism even is.
Wow. I love talking about demons so much. And I love this way you've come in through etymology. My grandmother, Esther Tucker, gave me a lifelong love of etymology, the origins of words, because what words we use to describe which phenomenon in the world tells us so much about what we thought about them in the past. There are at least 3 key terms for demons. One that you just brought, mazikin, has that root of damaging. Another very popular one, especially in Aramaic, is shadim, which seems to come from a term meaning a protective spirit in Akkadian, which is interesting that we have this protective spirit turning into a damaging spirit or a potentially damaging spirit. And then you also have ruchot, which is often, which means like winds or spirits or souls. And often it's a ruach ra, a spirit of ra, evil. And in terms of why demons are not just fun to study, it is an important insight into the minds of our great sages, into the way that they saw their world. And even if you struggle to see it as a literal experience, it then allows you to see their imagination. Practicing our imaginations is a very important skill. When we are able to practice imagining a different world, it makes other worlds become possible. Working in the world of demons and supernatural traditions allows us to take something where we might feel like the stakes are a lot lower and practice this effect for preparing ourselves when we need to imagine a very different world than the one we live in that affects lives in much more clear ways. I taught a session on demonology called Supernatural Evictions, where I looked at two stories of expelling demons and invited people to think about how they might lap onto stories today of eviction. I, as a queer and trans Jew, am very easily seeing myself in the marginalized figures in Jewish history, especially these demons who are like, don't seem to have a clear centered place that is delighted in by the authorities. When I've been marginalized, and I think this is true of many folks who I've learned with, when we have been marginalized, we find out what's in the margins too. And when that's demons, we say, wow, I can't help but read this demon story as reading it sort of about myself. So there's one story of 60 demons who all live together in a Zardta, which is either a sorb tree or a serviceberry tree, or maybe some really thick reeds. And a Bar Kasha, a son of hardness, but maybe a town official, goes near them and is endangered, which is a vague word. It's not clear if he's really in danger, or if he says he's in danger, or just thinks he's in danger, or if there really has been some damage, or maybe he came into their space and the demon said, we don't want you here. And he's like, oh no, I'm endangered. He goes and he gets a sage to write an amulet to get rid of these demons. Now, this sage doesn't understand that whenever you have a Zardta, this tree or reeds that's near a city, there's no fewer than 60 demons. And so he writes an amulet for only one demon. That's not going to work. The demons hang a chinga, they throw a party, or perhaps literally hang a chinga, an instrument, maybe, in their space. And they start singing. They say, you dress like a sage, but you don't know your prayers. And they get a second sage who does know that there are 60 demons, no fewer, writes a new amulet, and they hear, clear your stuff away. And my heart breaks. First of all, there are 60 demons all living in one space. Is this a housing crisis? Is this really good real estate? Is this
Sounds
how
like
they
a co-op.
want to live?
Sounds great.
It sounds great if that's like your vibe, right? Like 60 people, you're like, wow, that's the best polycule that I've ever heard of. It's like, or as you said, a commune, everybody nesting with each other. But maybe it's because they can't live anywhere else. And the idea that they have things, that the final line of the story is pack your things away. And that's the way Talmud stories go, is where it just like ends. And there's no moralizing afterwards. It's just the end of your story. Now, you could easily read this and say, wow, they got rid of the demons that were attacking their town officials. But it's not clear to me how actually endangered this person was. And it reads very much to me as these stories of how governments or people who are often labeled NIMBYs, not in my backyard people, who say, yeah, I want these social services in my community, but I don't want it in my backyard, will demonize human beings in order to pass policies that do not give them full rights and do not give them the protections that they need in order to thrive. And so when you can start at a place of demon eviction, they live in a tree, you can bring up these very real situations.
I'll share, like, as you were saying, as you were talking about demonizing human beings, which we experience often, it was interesting to reflect on the possibility of humanizing demons. And then I thought, no, we shouldn't be humanizing demons. That's not the point. The point is to accept them as demons. So what's the language for that? It's to equalize humans and demons or something. Anyway, I'm also reflecting on something that's come up for me recently when thinking about God, for example, is that in English, there's really only one word for God. And in Hebrew, there are many different words that are used for God, and that there's a lot of difficulty in talking about God in English that may not be as much there in Hebrew, because in Hebrew, you can just pick a different word. And that's okay. Whereas in English, when you pick a different word, it kind of feels like you're doing something that a lot of people object to. I'm wondering, when we talk about demons, I'm also thinking about how you helped us see that, it comes from 4 different words in Hebrew or Aramaic, and that that what we in English call demons is actually a broader category, that there's more subtlety in what we're talking about. So again, I'm wondering whether you can help us get to know a few individual demons. I know that your class is about Ashmedai, so that would be a good one to meet. And I'm wondering if maybe there are some others as well.
Yes, meet the demons. Meet the shady bunch. Ashmedai, you may know also as Asmodeus, is a demon who I'm going to be speaking about through 3 sessions, where we're going to examine his transformation through Jewish text and lore. I love the way that our traditions change and develop, and the way that we are players in that process and have a responsibility to shape them well. So, Ashmedai Asmodeus first shows up in Jewish literature in the book of Tobit in our Apocrypha. I know that Judaism Unbound is big fans of making Hanukkah into Apocryphest, and I am
That's right.
honored to be a part of this process. This is a book that I read for the first time in doing this research, and I invite anybody who is interested to as well. It's a little Jewish novella where a woman has had 7 husbands, 7 potential husbands, killed off by Ashmedai before they can get married. And a middle chunk of the plot is trying to resolve this situation, where the angel Raphael gives some very important demon knowledge. The next time for me that Ashmedai shows up is in Gittin, a Talmud volume about divorce, in a story that has nothing to do with divorce, about the building of King Solomon's temple. In this story, the rabbis take Ashmedai and turn him into a foil, a literary foil for King Solomon, where the rabbis have made him the king of the demons, a feature that was not true in Tobit, at least not explicitly. They do this because they need to put him up against King Solomon. I'm indebted to the book Migrating Tales by Richard Kalman for this analysis, that what the rabbis were doing was recognizing that magicians in their time, who were not very into the rabbis as authorities on the supernatural, were turning to King Solomon as their idol of magical leadership. And so they turn Ashmedai into a sage. The first time we meet him, he is coming back from studying in the study hall in heaven. The demon king studies in the study hall in heaven every day. Does King Solomon do that? No, he sure doesn't. Ashmedai keeps on, while they drag him back to go see King Solomon, he's helping people out along the road. He has important information that the king, the human king, does not, disposes the king, and seems no one criticizes his rulership. And thus he becomes a key part of the family, the royal family of Jewish demonology. We have a good number of queens too. You've probably heard of Lilith, and my favorite queen, Agrat Bat Machlat, the demon queen of Tuesday nights and Friday nights. Ashmedai as king continues to reign, and the third text that I'll bring is Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins by Eric Kimmel, which ends with a face-off against the king of the goblins, who to me is very clearly Ashmedai, who is now, for him, had lost his name, but none of his power. The way that we adapt our legends actively has a real impact on them. I think this is most evident through the story of Lilith, who for centuries was this terrifying being who would ruin every part of your household, would ruin your marriage, would take the life of your child. And when we moved into a time that had a lot less infant mortality, we didn't have as much of a need for a demon to blame for infant mortality. But it was right at the same time when we really needed a hero, or rather a heroine, for women's liberation. And so those aspects of her legend came to the forefront. When we changed her role, she changed too. And so I think we're at a really wonderful moment where we can look at a figure like Ashmedai, a demon king, one who has had a lot of work done to him, and figure out what role he could play in our world. And please know you have the power and authority to do that. You, listener, through studying these legends, have not only the power, but the responsibility to use them.
So that closing piece you just said, that it's in our hands, not our hands like Dan and Lex and Olivia, like in our collective societal hands to run with these narratives and apply them to our times and remap the Liliths and the Ashmedais to take on new meanings. That to me is like really the thesis statement, I hope, of this entire course for people who take it and for this episode. I find myself flashing to an episode of ours in the past that I didn't think would come up today, but to our conversation with Daniel Matt about Elijah. He wrote a biography of the character Elijah over the course of like kind of all time, but like looking at Elijah in biblical sources and then in Talmud and then in post-biblical stuff. And the way you are talking about Ashmedai, or maybe more generally Jewish demons, is actually very similar. And Daniel Matt, what he said about Elijah in his episode was, you know, what we learn about when we look at all these different stories of Elijah in different time periods, sure, it's a little bit about Elijah, the character, but it's mostly a way in to those different time periods. When you look at Elijah in biblical sources, you actually learn a lot about the people who were imagining Elijah a few thousand years ago. When you do so in the Talmud, you see a set of things about the people imagining Elijah 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. When you look at Elijah in the last few hundred years, you likewise learn a lot about the last few hundred years. And demons are another way in. And what they have that Elijah doesn't is this air of countercultural, of upending, like built in. Because like you said, I mean, to my knowledge, there are very few canonical traditional texts where demons are good. There are some where they're closer to neutral. And maybe you can point me to some where they're like really good. But in that story of Tobit, like Asmodeus is definitely not the hero. Asmodeus is killing these guys. But then we do humanize the demon, to use Dan's language. And I like what you said. It's more equalizing. We don't want to imply humans are better than demons. So humanize might be the wrong word. But like, I'd love to think sort of across time for a second. Is that the case? Is looking at the different portrayals of demons at different moments a way to better understand those time periods? From my perspective, I don't think many people are thinking of Neil Gaiman as like as like a maker of Midrash. I certainly think he is, but most people don't talk about him that way. I would argue that the ways in which he, in Lucifer and in Sandman and in a number of these sort of properties of his, and apologies to those who haven't read all of it, but like the main point is he is looking to people and characters and figures. Demons, I guess, aren't quite people, but maybe in some of these works they are, and trying to see them through the opposite set of connotations than the original. So Lucifer, the epitome of evil, is made into this very relatable story of, like you said, an eviction basically from the angelic universe in the show Lucifer. Mazikeen, whose name means demon, is made into one of the heroes of the show. Lilith, who you just mentioned, is her mother in this show, and we also see I don't have a better word, but a humanizing effort towards Lilith. I think that reflects a lot about our 21st century, like postmodern way of approaching traditions. We want to find the ways in which the bad folks are not so bad, in which the good folks might be less good than we thought. That's actually part of the story here. And so I'm curious, like, is that part of the value of studying demons too?
We can leave an incredible gift for our future generations by really embracing these traditions and making them of our time. There are other reasons than Jewish enlightenment that I wasn't taught demons. It has often been not safe to be a magical people. The podcast Jew Witches can really give you a nice breakdown of the way that the European witch idea was based on conceptions and misconceptions about Jewish life. And when the archetype for somebody who the dominant Christian society is trying to eliminate and put on trial is based on you, it's really dangerous to look like that. And so out of a mix of anti-Semitism and assimilation, we have had to and chosen to, at different times, give up our magic and our supernatural stories. And if you take the Kotzker Rebbe, they've left because we haven't kept them or we forced them out. I see this as a much safer time to re-embrace these traditions. There's a whole show, as you're talking about, Lucifer. There's writings, people are writing about these subjects. People want them. And I think there's still some fear of being seen as those Jewish demon people. And yet, if we can be the time that really embraces these stories and these legends and makes them real, they can be here for us and they can be here for future generations. Part of it is being honest to history and looking at these transformations. And part of it is the gift that we get when we look at those historical moments as more than the facts of these figures' stories, but the meta level of what they were doing in each era, and be intentional about how we use our stories now.
I'm actually thinking back again to that early book of the Talmud that I read that talked about the demons in the bathroom. And I remember thinking about it back then and saying, wow, they actually were intuiting something that we now know is true, which is that there's germs in the bathroom, right? That there are things to be afraid of in the bathroom. And that they kind of had a sense that something was happening in the bathroom that we couldn't see, but we knew that it was there because people would get sick in various ways. And so they imagined this world of demons that were really bad because they are really representing something that we know to be bad. Although actually, I guess we could think more deeply about whether or not germs are bad. But when you think about it that way, then you say, okay, so what demons really represent in rabbinic lore, in Jewish lore, at least includes a way to try to capture things that they thought of as bad but couldn't see, and the things that they thought of as good but they couldn't see, they would call that angels or God. And yet, now we're talking about the idea that these demons, for example, Lilith and Asmodeus and Mazikeen, as we've been talking about, that they can kind of be re-understood the way we've often re-understood a lot of things that ancient peoples thought of as bad. For example, taking a queer read on them and saying, there are a lot of things that in ancient societies they thought of as bad, and yet now we don't think of them as bad. So we're going to reclaim those characters as actually representing good or representing these marginalized identities. I'm wondering if you could just kind of give us more color on that perspective, as we sort of step back from living in the world of demons in this kind of way that I think at least some of our listeners might say, but I don't believe in that. That doesn't speak to me because I don't believe in supernatural things. How do we think about the value of exploring demons where, for the whole history of the show, we've been exploring the value of exploring the Torah, even though we don't necessarily agree that those things are real?
I love this through line that you're drawing. The demons in the bathroom and brachot could really just be germs, that they were mistaking one thing for another. There was something that was said that has stuck with me. We mentioned that panel you were on at the Jewish Weeks of Flourishing 7 years ago or something, where one of the speakers said, "What job are you hiring God to do?" Which blew my mind and has always stuck with me.
I think that's Erwin Kula, right?
Yeah, it was.
Thank you, Erwin Kula. Thank you for that line. If you're listening, thank you. What job are you hiring demons to do? Where in your life do you need a demon? Where in your life do you have something that seems to be beyond control, beyond rules, that would really help if it had some control and some rules? Because demons don't just come with chaos, they come with amulets. These ways to control, and they come with ways to learn and understand in the world. Our supernatural traditions answer these unanswerable questions and give us some comfort around them. I teach about demonology because I am thirsty for ways that people find to bring demons and our supernatural traditions into their lives. I'm excited for the artwork that people create. I'm excited for the theater productions people make. I'm excited for I had this absurd experience today and I think it was a demon. And so I made this amulet And now I'm more focused. And now I've thought about Jewish text, and now I've thought about Jewish traditions of creative protection. I also love what you were saying, Dan, about demons being this way, as I was talking about in that story of eviction, of a way to see people or anything in the world that we've marginalized and thought of as bad that maybe isn't so bad and is just part of creation and should be understood as part of creation. Pirkei Avot has a teaching that demons were created at the very last moment before the first Shabbat, that God intentionally brought demons into the world. It is our responsibility to understand, or at least appreciate, that the divine had an intention in bringing demons into the world, and not think we are so much that we can cast them off.
I want to shift gears a little, but I don't think it's fully a shift gears. Like, this is our unit of episodes on digital Judaism. And thus far, we've spoken more about demon history than digital Judaism, which I love. I relish it. But my smooth segue here is, what's another realm of contemporary Jewish experience that is sometimes demonized? Digital Jewish life. Yay. See what I did there, everyone? Yeah, I don't know. But we've talked about this on the show a lot. I mean, constantly, over and over and over again, the work that we do as Judaism Unbound and the work that you do teaching in other digital spaces and that lots and lots and lots of people do creating forms of Jewish life online is marked as problematic. I'm trying to avoid that word demonized because we've explored the ways that it's harmful and that it implies demons are bad. That's a good word to describe what has been done to digital Judaism, because people are constantly ready to say, "Oh, you're making all these like cool Jewish programs, and now people aren't going to join synagogues, or now people aren't going to participate in offline forms of Jewish life." And I continue to try every single day of my life to fight against this theoretical competitive maneuver where the only thing digital Judaism does is like poach people from non-digital forms of Jewish experience. To me, it just is ludicrous. It would be like saying, oh my gosh, there's good Jewish life in San Francisco, so not everybody's going to live in New York. Oh no. No, of course we wouldn't say that. We want there to be forms of Jewish life everywhere that are meaningful to people, especially meaningful to folks who are struggling to find themselves in offline Jewish institutions. So
Amen.
I kind of want to go to you and ask a question about the roles that you've held teaching in online spaces. And in doing so, I'm going to break the fourth wall. When we invited you onto this podcast, your first response was like, Lex, are you sure you want me? Like, I'm not really like I'm not like a digital Jew. I don't have some like big TikTok presence. I don't have like that's not my thing. And what I said to you is, Olivia, you have held digital Jewish space for Svara, you've held digital Jewish space for Shel Mala, wonderful digital Jewish yeshiva, and you're about to in the Unyeshiva. Like this, you're a digital Jewish educator. That doesn't mean you're not an offline Jewish educator or an offline Jewish performer and all the things you do. But I name that because I think for many people who are actually like, in my mind, leaders of the digital Jewish ecosystem, digital Jewish community, they don't even perceive themselves that way. And that's actually something I want to talk about. I think we need to see ourselves a little more that way. And since you were in that zone, I kind of want to open that up. So like, what is this online ecosystem that you've been inhabiting, teaching about Jewish magic? Why might it be important?
Such an amen to your comparison about San Francisco versus New York or anything, that I come with a great amount of privilege to be able to do and enjoy and attend in-person and online Jewish programming, which is not the case for everybody. And if you want the open tent of Judaism, you got to embrace every way that people are finding it. Being able to teach online is amazing. Being able to learn and learn from teachers who are all around the world is something that I never really tried to do before, and something that I sometimes imagine our sages would have loved.
They would have imagined it's demons bringing messages from one another.
Yeah, there is one moment where they are talking about, did somebody really teach a sermon in 2 different cities on the same day? And they say, well, maybe a demon taught that sermon and flew across the world in that time. I really want to come towards online Jewish programming from this realm of accessibility, where not only is it accessible because you can attend from wherever is working for you, whether that's your home, your bed, on the go with the Zoom in your pocket, but that you have ways to make it even more accessible through captioning, through ASL interpretation, through having people who are trained at managing the tech in the Zoom room, and through having these digital spaces connected to learning where people can continue conversation. One of my favorite parts about teaching with Shalmala is that there is an entire Discord that as soon as the session ends for the day, people are in the Discord sharing their thoughts and saying, this was sitting with me, this was sitting with me. How about that? How about
and
this?
Discord, I think most of our listeners know what Discord is, but just for those who don't, it's a digital forum for interacting, and it's used between classes in Shalmala and in many other, and after classes long afterwards. Yeah.
Yes, so much so that I can have a thought 2 years later about a class and go to that Discord thread and post about it and start a whole new conversation. Another gift for me as a teacher is that I get a fancy little Zoom recording afterwards that I can look back on my own teaching and not hyperanalyze every moment, but make sure that I covered material that I meant to cover. Oh, did I explain that in a way that was really helpful? That student said something that was really amazing that I didn't have the capacity to fully process. Plus, the chat. The chat is modern day Gemara. It is this active commentary, this oral tradition that is formed alongside the main vocal discussion. I'm also privileged to be able to discuss and also catch a question and weave that in when possible, and then save it afterwards. I can say at the end of something, please put something in the chat that's sitting with you or a question that you still have, and a waterfall of chat messages will appear. And then I have an instant feedback form on what I just taught. And everybody else does too. I teach a class and somebody's like, oh, this is a book that this has reminded me of. This is an article. This is a poem. And then that's all these resources in the chat for people in ways that are easier to receive than an in-person session. I also really love in-person learning. You can't sing and harmonize the same way online. We haven't cracked that code yet. I can share music and people can sing along and we can watch each other dance on Zoom, which is also wonderful. But if I really want to bring us in and sing together, that's still not quite there. If I want to right afterwards go out and eat together, it's a little more complicated. But they each have their own gifts.
So another piece of digital Jewish learning that I think we don't always notice or talk about is, I'll explain what I mean in a second, but in the digital Jewish universe or multiverse, whatever the heck it is, specificity of topic is rewarded. Having something really specific, like, I mean, Jewish demons, honestly, that's actually not the most specific. It feels specific to us because we haven't heard about it before. There's so much Jewish demon stuff, but like Asmodeus, Ashmedai, a class about a particular demon and how he's come up in different texts. I mean, like that, I'm anticipating some pretty strong interest in this. I mean, as we record this, we haven't opened registration yet. As you're listening, we probably have, and I hope all of you have already signed up. If you haven't, go and click at judaismunbound.com/classes. But like, I don't think we're going to struggle to have a lot of people that want to take your class based on past experience with similarly weird, I don't know how to have a better word, like things that are seen as off the beaten path, magical, weird, they do well online. Offline, the general is more rewarded. And what I mean by that is if you look at the vast majority of synagogues and JCCs and like the kinds of classes that they have, the most common is something like Intro to Judaism. That is really general because when you're planning something in a particular space, you have a small enough number of Jews that you're thinking like, okay, there's a certain set of people that are in driving distance or in walking distance or in whatever. And so if we try to have a class about Jewish demons, like, are there going to be enough folks for me in Providence, Rhode Island that want to take that? I actually think there might be, but I think the pressures are to think about what would speak to the most people a bit, like enough that they would sign up for the class, as opposed to what will speak to a small percentage of the universe, but really deeply. That's what's rewarded online. That's why the most successful organizations online, they tend not to just be like, oh, we're a Jewish organization. It tends to be like, we're a Jewish organization that does this very specific thing. But everybody on the planet with internet access is able to make their way there in some form. And so that specificity is rewarded. Again, I actually do encourage people offline to run with the Jewish Demon class. I think that more spaces would have critical mass than we think. I think the pressures to be general are sometimes misguided because we think that folks just want like entryways into Judaism, but often they want like, let's be super weird. But can you talk to us a little bit about what kinds of things you've taught offline, what kinds of things you've taught online? Is it different for you, or are you mostly doing the same things? Like, help me. You can argue with me if you think that what I'm saying isn't quite right. But my sense is that there's a reason why digital Jewish stuff tends to be very queer, tends to be very off the beaten path, tends to, like, you're able to do that. Whereas if I tried to do the trans and queer look at Jewish demons in Providence, Rhode Island, which is actually by some measures one of the queerest cities in the country, doing the legwork to get all of those people in that room would be a lot harder.
I'm only going to teach the fringy weird stuff. That's whether I'm in person or online, I'm going to teach the stuff that has caught my attention. And Hashem willing, through my enthusiasm and the artwork I have found or commissioned and put together in a packet of resources that are far more than we have time for, hopefully encourage other people to fall in love with something they have maybe only ever heard of a little bit or was so on the edge of their understanding of what's in the Jewish canon. I'm not sure I'm able to speak to the specifics of the lay of the land of the program offerings in person and online. I love the communities that we can form online where your physical location doesn't matter as much. And I love the way that specific kind of conversations can bring people together in person in their community who might not have known each other. You throw your very specific, we're talking about demons in Providence, and you find people come out of the woodwork who never thought there was space for them in person. And then they're friends. And then they're like, wow, this synagogue cares about my interests. The same is true online, especially when somewhere that feels like they are very grounded in a specific place says we're going to do some online programming and we are going to say anybody in the world can learn with us. And you say, wow, that place cares about me, even though I'm not in their neighborhood.
I'm wondering, if you announce a class at the local synagogue on Jewish demons, do we imagine that there's a critical mass of people interested in Jewish demons? Frankly, I think the answer is yes. And so I think that with certain topics, there is simply a failure of imagination or just a disagreement about what's important in Judaism as to why they don't do programs like that. I think there are certain topics that are probably really exciting to people, and a lot of people would come in person. And then there are other topics that I think that are more specific, that are maybe a little less sexy, that you say, I'm going to have a class on, let's say, the Book of Tobit, Lex, sorry, but a lot of people will say, I've never heard of that. I'm not coming to that class. But if you do that class online, you will find enough people that have heard of it and that are excited about it, and that will sort of fill the online room. So I'm wondering, in part, based on your experience teaching and learning online, and also your experience teaching and learning in a smaller Jewish population city, whether you have other advice or thoughts, both for the people who are doing Jewish life locally in various smaller cities and towns around America, and perhaps for those of us who are doing online Jewish things, as to how we might do things differently, better, more than we might have thought to do.
I'll talk about a recent experience where I was invited back to the synagogue where I had been program coordinator, Rodef Shalom in Pittsburgh, to teach a very niche program about women in Talmud, and not even the big balabustas, but I tried to find the most average women I could in Talmud and teach about them. And about 20 people were able to make it in person on a Tuesday evening. And at least 70 people had watched on the Facebook live stream and the YouTube live stream. So the advice that I have is to live stream your stuff even when you're in person, if it's safe for your community to do so, because it also gives you material that you then have in the pocket of your community to be able to work with and spread and have and say, this is the kind of learning that we celebrate. And it makes sure that it can live beyond that one moment. You mentioned Chicago, and I'd love to give a shout out to Svara, where I've trained as a teacher in teaching Talmud. Svara has its office in Chicago, but since the beginning of the pandemic, and actually a year before, had started doing programming online. And now most of the Svaraverse is digital and such an incredible community to learn with all across the world.
As we close, I want to give you one last chance to really clinch those people that are close to clicking register. They're on JudaismUnbound.com/classes. They've read the description. They've heard your amazing wisdom in this episode. And they're like, am I going to press that button? Am I there? And you are about to give the closing thoughts about why this class is powerful that will help them go ahead with pressing that button.
You are going to go on a time travel journey into the imagination of the sages and the writers, and you are going to be imbued with the power to shape our supernatural traditions, and you are going to create the new generation of Jewish demons, because you are going to be knowledgeable and you are going to fall in love with our tradition. I, here in my little apartment in Pittsburgh, PA, on Haudenosaunee land, am going to connect with you wherever you are in the world, and we are going to bask in this lore. You might leave in love with demons. You might leave saying, wow, demons are pretty bad. But as long as you leave with a purpose for demons in your life, I will be so happy to have learned with you and from you.
What an amazing note to end on. Thank you so much, Olivia Devorah, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for having me. This has been a real dream come true.
A dream come true. We love that. Thanks to you, Olivia Devorah, for joining us. And thanks to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. A reminder, you should go straight to JudaismUnbound.com/classes, sign up for this course, learn about our other mini courses that are being offered in the next few weeks. It's going to be amazing times at the Onion Yeshiva. You want to take Olivia Devorah's class. You just heard their wisdom. It's going to be amazing. Also, we, of course, encourage you to be in touch with us, and there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. You can head to our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram handles. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, you can head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com, learn more about the Onion Yeshiva, check out our other podcast episodes, all that good stuff. And you can email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. We are also, of course, very appreciative if you can support us with a financial donation on either a monthly recurring basis or just as a one-time gift, which you can do via JudaismUnbound.com/donate. And the last thing we'd say is that, of course, support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.